Good evening, everyone. Welcome to everyone joining us this evening. We've got an evening of discussing wealth taxes and John Trickett's latest report. So we're delighted to be joined by John to talk about it in person, and Nadia Jama from the NEC to offer us her perspective, and Socialist Telly regulars Bonnie and Damo. So welcome, everyone. Nice to see you. So I'm going to get straight in with the questions, John. So I was so excited when I saw this report come out. You've been doing fantastic tweets for quite a while now on wealth stuff, and it's brilliant to see somebody raising these issues. And then this report came out. So I'm going to go to you and ask you to introduce some of the ideas that you put in your vision. So why are you proposing wealth taxes? What is your vision in this report?
Well, look, here's the big picture first. We live in an economy, a capitalist economy, and the key determining factor behind the way in which our economy and our society is structured is about wealth, or we could call it capital, with a capital C, capital. And why do I say that? It's because the main way we organize our economy is on the basis of wealth, employing workers to work on the behalf of we call them the bosses, the people who've got the wealth. Now, what happens on every occasion where a worker is working for a private wealth is the workers actually produce the wealth, but the profits of that wealth, of that work, go to the capitalists, make them richer. And this is the key structural element of how we organize our economy. Now, it's become clearer and clearer that this is a serious problem for Britain, the way that we organize our economic structures. And so my first objective was to get us talking about wealth, its use, the way it exploits workers, and then to suggest there might be solutions, but also to show how our society is distorted in a number of ways because of the way that capitalism is working, and then to suggest that there could be some possible solutions to it. That was my central thought. Obviously, I produced a long report, 75 pages long, so I don't think it's difficult to read. And what it shows is the way in which wealth has just exploded at the expense of working people. And I think we should all be concerned about that. I'll just add one final point to this first contribution, which is that probably it might be self-evident, but it's not really self-evident that the way we structure our tax system effectively bends the knee to wealth. Why do I say that? It's because tax in our country is almost exclusively imposed on the income derived from work. Income tax, national insurance, and then we've got VAT, which, as we know, falls largely on working people. When it comes to taxing wealth, we don't do it. It's bizarre. And another thing is, lots of people derive an income from wealth, but they don't work to earn it. Other people are working for them. And unearned income is taxed less than the income you get from being at work. Now that, it seems to me, it shows the priorities of our society. And I said finally, but I'll just make one final point. Labour has never really seriously decided to tackle wealth and capital in a serious way, though there was a conversation under Gordon Brown, I think, with the two Eds, where they discuss, it's in Ed Balls's book, where they did discuss should they have a wealth tax, but they decided, I think the Treasury said it's too difficult, Mr. Chancellor, it's too difficult. So in the end, we didn't do it, but we should have done. And I'll give you the figures, and possibly as we go through the evening, the figures are absolutely enormous, and they should be taxed, because why are we taxing working people, often on low incomes? We're leaving wealth untaxed. So that's my central idea.
Actually, so I want to just come back to fantastic introduction, and thank you. But on that last point, why has that become the case? How have we got to this point that we're taxing workers more than we are taxing the bosses? And this unimaginable wealth is escalating off into foreign bank accounts. How did we get to this point?
It's very hard to say exactly why. If we go back into history, the labour movement was established to promote the interests of working people. Now, there are different ways of doing it. But generally speaking, it would mean either modifying drastically or abolishing capitalism if you really want to press forward the interests of working people. And that was understood at the beginning of the Labour Party. But gradually, over time, our leaders began to adapt to capitalism, and it became unthinkable that you should tax wealth because the stupid argument that wealth is created by rich people, and then it trickles down to everybody else. Manifestly not the case. But that is the ideological position that's dominant in our society. And by the way, I think in all of the economics faculties, in all of the universities, possibly until quite lately, this idea of neoliberalism and monetarism, all this kind of thing, that wealth somehow plays an active role in the creation of more wealth, when it's untrue. Workers create wealth. The capitalists suck the wealth off of them by taking profits, what Marx called surplus value. I'm sorry to be complicated, but that's where it is. So it's a myth, is trickle down. It actually gets sucked up.
Don't apologise for the details, John. I'm loving it. And we're going to come back to you for some more of that in just a minute. But I want to go to the others first for a quick reaction, because I know everyone else was as impressed as I was about this report. But if I can go to you first, Bonnie, which point sort of stood out for you, or what got you most excited from this report?
Well, the bottom line is we have got so many regressive taxes in this country. The longest standing regressive tax, and a regressive tax is obviously where people who have the smallest incomes are taxed disproportionately to the money they've got to spend. And one of the most disproportionate taxes that we've had in this country has been here since the 70s. And it was imposed in order as a precondition to join the common market back in the 70s, and it's what we call now VAT. The EU set a limit of tax that they wanted each country to charge on luxury goods. We'll call them luxury goods, although I'd argue that a lot of them are no longer by any means luxury, they're necessary goods. And that obviously, if you're on a smaller income, if you've got a lower budget, you have to buy cheaper goods and pay the tax on them. But the fact of the matter is, often the cheaper goods need replacing more often. So people on lower incomes are having to pay that tax again and again and again. And one of the benefits we could have had from leaving the EU would have been to abolish that tax altogether, because you're being taxed as someone on a lower income, you're being taxed on the money you earn and you're being taxed on the money that you spend. So it's, in a way, it's a double taxation, and that ought to be dropped. But then, of course, the government have outdone themselves and added a flat rate rise of national income tax as well, which again is disproportionately hitting people on the smallest incomes. So now is really the time to start challenging these things and putting the case forward, as John has done so well in his report. We really need to rip up these taxes and do a root and branch review of all of the money brought in by the government from people, so that those with the broad, I mean, it's a fundamental tenet of our movement, those with the broadest shoulders should carry the most of the cost, most of the burden. And at the moment, it's the inverse of that we're experiencing. So I'm really excited to see finally one of our great MPs to put the case forward to get that changed around.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for starting us off there, Bonnie. Damien, I'm going to come to you next. I know you've been engrossed in reading this and are quite up on the details of it as well. So what were the bits that stood out for you?
You take a passing interest in it. I did a whole video on it myself, actually, because I thought it was an absolutely fantastic document to produce. 75 pages. Must have taken you a while, John, but thank you very much for having taken the time to put this out there. And it's really quite disappointing, actually, that the Labour Party, the party of workers, as it's supposed to be, has shied away from taxing wealth before. And the one thing that stood out for me in this report most was the fact that we tax earnings in this country, but the earnings, when people think about earnings, they're thinking about it what I'm making from work, what I'm getting from my job, and that's taxed to a degree that incomes, and incomes can come from all manner of different places. I mean, if you're a landlord, you may well be collecting rental income. You're not paying income tax on that. If you are collecting dividends from investments, if you have the means to invest, that's not taxed properly. And of course, people in that position tend to be inherently wealthier. So then, of course, you get this exploitation of the system, certain tax loopholes and various exemptions, all making our tax laws in the UK ridiculously complicated, and they really don't need to be. And it's little wonder that we're now living in a country with more inequality than ever before, more billionaires than ever before. The richest 250 people in the UK have, over the course of the pandemic, seen their personal wealth rise by more than £100 billion. That is such a ridiculous number, but to try and give people an idea of what that looks like, if you imagine every pound of that as 1 second of time, it would add up to over 3,100 years. And that's not getting taxed. Meanwhile, you've got people furloughed on a fraction of their wages because we can't afford to pay them enough. We've got 14 million people living in poverty because we can't afford to give them enough to live on. A 33% increase in food bank use. So there's now more of them than branches of McDonald's. And yet, despite all of that, the Tories are going to hike national insurance, which is a tax on wages. They're going to cut universal credit, which tops up wages too low to live on. And they claim they've got to do it to balance the books. Yet in that blasted budget, Rishi Sunak read out the other day, he's going to give bankers a £900 million tax break. This system is making fools of people. And it's fantastic that John has written this report because it's exposing it. And we need to make a lot of noise about it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Damien. You're making me wince there, but not because I don't like listening to you talk, because those figures are just so painful to listen to. It's
they hurt. They really are.
Yeah, it really does. Bonnie, you just wanted to come in on the landlord point, is that right?
Yeah, I was just going to say, not only are the incomes from unearned income not being taxed, it's even worse than that. The owners of the factories, the owners of the properties and so on actually get tax deductions for making money in that way, should they decide to invest on it to make it better, let's say if you're a landlord and you decide to put in a new kitchen, you can put the rents up. They get that kitchen on behalf of the taxpayer. It's a tax deductible from any money they're going to make from it. So it's even worse than them not paying tax. They're actually getting rewarded to be able to earn more money from, well, they're getting paid more money. They're not earning that money at the end of the day. The only people that earn money are the workers, the people above us, the managers, the director class, if you like, are sitting back and waiting for us all to go out and make them millionaires. And it's really time that we got that changed.
I think there's got to be a debate actually between these words earnings and incomes, because there is a significant difference between the two.
Completely.
I do think we need to make a lot more noise about, how many other ways there are. Some people can make money, and whether or not it's taxed, which, well, it just isn't, not really.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, John, so can you give us a little bit more of the detail of the sort of taxes that you're proposing, and what kind of revenues would these be bringing in? Have you got a prescriptive idea of how you want to approach this, or are you open to different ways?
Well, there's a number of ways of tackling this. The first thing is, so many people, the propagandists, the media, and all the people who work for the ruling class, let's call it what it is, like to pretend it's impossible. Oh, no, you can't do that. The people are it's not going to work. We've shown in our report, we've been very, very, very moderate. Not like me, I'm usually a big radical, but I thought, well, I'll be careful. So we knew that if you brought in a tax, immediately they'd change the way they behave. That's what they always do. So we've made assumptions that quite a lot of them will find slippery ways of avoiding paying some of the tax. So the figures we've used are irrefutable, because they're much lower than what the Treasury would actually give you an estimate, because I wanted to avoid the Daily Mail or somebody saying, well, Trickett's got it wrong, they're all going to avoid paying tax. Now, I think there are several ways of taxing wealth. And so our report has offered 4 different ways. And what I want to do is, during the autumn and winter, is have a discussion with economists, with activists, trade unionists, party members, perhaps not so many MPs are going to engage in it, but we can always hope, to see what works and what doesn't work. But there's 4 options, and the 4 options what we've done is worked out the average of the 4 options. It would raise £220 billion on very, very low level of tax in a parliament. Now, but that's only part of the picture, because there's also people avoiding tax in various different ways, not paying it. It's legal to not pay tax, you know, if you can find a way of doing it, and that's what they do. Because none of us in this room do that, because we don't have clever accountants working for us. And anyway, I wouldn't believe it was the right thing to do. But so we've made assumptions about that, and we've also said that you've got to equalise earned and unearned income. Now, most people in the pub or the club or in the football ground or at work or wherever you meet them will not believe that they're paying tax on their earned income, what they've got from work, whereas there is a whole class of people in our society that don't work, but they're making more money and they're not taxed on it to the same extent. And so we've made an assumption about equalising the levels of tax between earned and unearned income. You could say you should tax them more, because if we're the party of Labour and we're in favour of work, as Sir Keir has said we are, then why don't we tax the people who don't work, who earn money, more than those of us who do work? But anyway, I didn't do that even. And then we've made some other assumptions as well. It's all in that report. You could raise probably about £500 billion in a parliament by being a moderate little centrist MP like myself, or yourselves as activists. And £500 million, you could do quite a bit with £500 million, £500 billion. Let's get it right, £500 billion. 500 billion. That's what we're talking about. It wouldn't really hurt the wealthy. It wouldn't really. Let me just give you one figure. The stock exchange. If you take, I've done this. I've taken every company on the stock exchange, the London Stock Exchange, and I asked, and we calculated how much were they worth at the time of the banking crash, and how much were they worth just before COVID hit. Well, we were all suffering. Our services were cut, people's wages were held back, and all the rest of it. I'm talking about before COVID. Those companies increased their value by £2 trillion. They doubled the amount of wealth in corporate Britain at the London Stock Exchange. And it's completely extraordinary that there's no proper discussion about it. You see, when it comes to companies, we tax their profits, but we don't necessarily tax the wealth, because it's put into various different trust funds and so on and so forth. So, there is large amounts of money there, and the country is economically in decline, apart from in the city of London. And so my view is to use that money, not only to build up our services and to pay people a proper wage, but to begin to invest, to build a green economy based on social justice. Imagine all the anger in our country would dissipate if we had a country based on social justice, and we began to move into an era where we're helping to save the planet as well. I believe that anger, which is there, it's felt, people don't express it necessarily in a very good way. If you begin to build a better, more equitable society, I believe we can tackle some of the social ills which underlie it as well, by the way.
Completely and utterly, John. I mean, the fact of the matter is, if that extra money was in the coffers, we wouldn't be even worrying about paying our NHS staff a 15% pay rise. And when you think of the money that could be spent on the staff working in our public services, I know that the NHS has got they call it a multiplier of at least 4, and so do the railway. So for every £1 that the government were to spend on staff working in the NHS, on the railways, in any public sector role, that money suddenly grows to go from £1 to £4 or more. So it's an absolute no-brainer. We need more money to spend on those so we can get the economy moving again. We've had 10 years of austerity, and it's just caused us immeasurable harm as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
I think for me, the good thing about John's report is that it gives us 4 options. There are 4 different ways, and probably more, to tax wealth. And I think, you know, that for me is something that we really need to make sure we're focusing on as a party, because I personally would want something that redistributes wealth and income to fully address today's obviously inequalities. So the hybrid wealth tax is my favourite, John, because, you know, that would be a one-off wealth tax, but it's ongoing. You know, you've talked about how wealth has, you know, earned all of these billions and trillions of pounds and dollars over the, you know, the pandemic. So it has to be something that's also ongoing. But just having that hybrid wealth tax for the next 5 years would give us something like £304 billion back into the economy. You know, we've got to be doing those things. They're things for me that Labour should be at the forefront of pushing. Shouldn't be difficult for us to agree these things. Absolutely not. And, you know, you've talked about who you would exempt as well. So, you know, you've talked about, you know, people that might be asset rich but cash poor. So it's a fair taxing of the wealth, believe it or not. So, you know, there are different ways to do it that are still fair. So, you know, I think it's a wonderful report. And, you know, John, it's amazing that you've put this together, because it's needed. And I think it gives us something that it's done in such a way that people can understand it, because I think taxing and taxation is so complex and people don't understand all of the different levels that everybody's mentioned. But this report puts it in a way that we can all get to grips with it and understand and see the inequalities and the unfairness of the current system. So that for me is, you know, it's amazing. So thank you.
Thanks so much. For those who haven't read it yet, I mean, we thought about it long and hard. By the way, my team in my office are absolutely brilliant, and I wanted to put the names in because they helped to write it, but they all said, no, bugger off, you can have your name in it instead. But I'm saying thank you, but I'm not naming them. But so for those who haven't read it, for example, one of the things, because I was trying to work out how would the right wing, and when I say right wing, I'm not excluding people in our movement, but I'm thinking more at the moment about the media and the Tories and everybody else, all the people who are there to try to stab us. How will they attack us? Where's our Achilles heel? And I thought, well, one of the Achilles heels is the little old lady, you know, the mythical, well, there will be little old ladies and probably big old gentlemen as well. We don't want to be sexist. Who has no cash, but is sitting in sort of a reasonable house in London that's worth £2 or £3 million, but they couldn't pay the tax. So we've excluded them. And in fact, we said we don't want to tax the wealth contained in your first house. Of course, if you've got half a dozen houses, like some of them have or more, then they ought to pay tax. So it's little details like that, because we spent ages trying to think of every single way that you can be attacked. And if I can just say this about Achilles, this is off the subject, but it's worth saying it to an audience of lefties. You know, here's one of the best warriors that's ever lived on the earth, and he only has one tiny little spot that where he can be injured and killed, and it's on his heel, as we know. It's probably about as big as my little fingernail, but they find that spot and they defeat him. Now, I think we've got a watertight report with no Achilles heels in it, but perhaps somebody's going to jump up a minute and say, yes, you have, Trickett, you made a right bollocks of something. But so we've tried to take account of every single way it might be attacked, because we've got to be robust. And if you propose something which is a big revolutionary transformative change, it's got to be right. And so I've done the numbers really, really carefully, like I said earlier. Now, I'm going to keep on adding numbers in, not because I expect to give you a test at the end to see which numbers you've remembered. But there's another thing, apart from that, the doubling of the wealth of the London Stock Exchange, it's worth just thinking about for a minute. In the report, we point out that we've discovered, our research showed that the big corporations have got around about £900 billion in cash. £900 billion in cash, liquid money, unspent, lying there, And that is the equivalent, it's almost £1 trillion. That is the equivalent of 4 months' production for every man, woman, and child in the whole of the United Kingdom. It's 2/5, I think. Yeah, it's 40% of GDP. Now that's a vast amount of money. Now look, there's people in poverty, but there's also people, in very difficult working conditions. That money could be used to invest, to make people more productive, better paid, and to make the economy much more prosperous. So wherever you look, once you start asking the questions, there is a lot of dosh around. And wherever we look, because we're Labour, there's a lot of poverty and difficulty around as well. My answer is this: let one meet the other. Let the rich, the wealthy, fund what's happening, and fund a revolution in the way we do the economy, so it becomes a more green economy too. Now, somebody's done something about, I don't know which one it is, about modern monetary theory. I'm fully aware of modern monetary theory. We can't discuss it here. It's very complicated. But at some point or other, if people are interested, we could have a conversation about it. I'm quite interested in modern monetary theory, but actually there are problems with it as well, as somebody else has responded on the question. So just to say to whichever comrades asked that, we could have another debate about it with some economists, but not tonight.
Okay, thanks for addressing that, John. I wanted to come back to a point you raised in your earlier contribution about when people are seeing how the economy is working in their region, everything's looking quite desperate. And when we start to talk about taxing wealth, a lot of people, because we're thinking about our own circumstances and what we can see, people just can't imagine that this could be possible because they perceive the economy as struggling in the state that it's in now. So how would we persuade people? What kind of transformations would this kind of wealth taxation do to the economy? And you have started to touch on this, but I wonder if you could expand that a little bit so people could understand how it would transform the economies in their region and areas as well.
Okay, well, let's just let's take a long historical perspective for it. I'm sorry if sometimes my answers are a bit long, but anyway, take a long historical perspective. The regions of the country outside of London historically created the wealth. The Industrial Revolution, I don't know, the tin mines in Damien's Patch and the shipbuilding and all the other things which went on all over the country. The Industrial Revolution in the Midlands, Birmingham, Coventry, the workshop of the world it used to be called, all those things. And obviously the coal mining in Wales, the work in Scotland and everything else. All of that created the wealth which was sucked in to London. And I don't mean to the poor people of London. Obviously, there's a lot of poverty in London. We're not saying the north versus south or any working class people wherever they live. But the wealth of the city of London, apart from based partly on slavery, was often created by our regions. Now, what then happened, as you know, is the ruling class in Britain decided to put all its money into the city of London, financialisation of the economy, under Mrs. Thatcher with the Big Bang and all the other things which happened. Labour played a role in that too. We've got to be honest about it, but for different reasons. And the regions, which had been the source of the country's wealth, deindustrialized. Now, I consider myself fortunate, though it makes me an old man, because I worked in factories as a manual worker as a young man. Working in the factories in Leeds, in the clothing factories, was a great experience. I was a fitter. It was a great experience. But the point is, I saw what happened when the clothing industry crashed and went. And I saw what happened, and now I represent a coal mining community, when the mines closed too. And you can see it on Tyneside and in Portsmouth and various other places. As the economy began to deindustrialize, the regions fell back. And as a consequence of falling back, the amount of output per hour that a worker, say in Leeds or Wakefield in my patch, produces is only half the output of an average worker in London. It's about half. And that means our wages are less. So there's no point giving you the figures, but the figures are absolutely clear. So deindustrialization, lack of investment in the regions, low incomes, poverty, ill health, all poor education, and then the cuts all follow on, reinforcing each other one after the other, until in the end we've got the great the great mammoth financial sector in the City of London deriving its wealth from global financial transactions, often in crown colonies where they don't pay tax on it. On the one hand, then you got the rest of the country that used to provide the wealth to keep the city going, now being allowed to decline. So my view is we owe a debt to all of those areas which helped to create the wealth of our country and worked hard and loyally for our country, down the pits or wherever. And obviously I want to be careful about being gendered here. Lots of work done by women in different contexts as well. Now they are in decline, and I can show you graphs, say of Yorkshire, where productivity in Yorkshire is still falling, whereas productivity in the City of London is still rising. It's getting further and further behind. Now, what we're going to do about it, we can either just accept it. And by the way, if you put a map of who voted for Brexit, you'll see it's the post-industrial communities, by the way. That's a side issue. What we're going to do about it? Nothing? My view is to take the wealth from the city and from other places where the wealth exists, to use it to rebuild a national economy, but based on two principles: one, equality and social justice, and two, greening our planet, greening our country. You could offer jobs to people in the north of England or in the southwest, which contribute to a greener world, paid for by the money, the wealth which effectively was stolen from us by the City of London. Let's take it back. Now that is a big subject. I could go on for 2 or 3 hours, because I live in Yorkshire. I live in a coalfield community. I know what's going on, but anyway, you get the message.
And just following on from that, John, I think some of the practical things that have come out of your kind of report about how the wealth tax would fix some of that regional inequality, simple things that people will be able to understand, like, making the £20 universal credit uplift permanent. We know that all people across the country, particularly I know in Sheffield, would benefit from that. Thousands of families with that extra money in the pockets, even my family members. And we know that lots of people on universal credit are actually working too. These people, in work poverty is rife. There's local council funding. Everybody knows how cash-strapped councils have been under, Tory governments for the last decade of austerity. The falling in Sheffield, something like 480 million over the last decade has been lost in local government funding. So these inequalities can start to be addressed with this wealth tax. Education, you talked about that. In Sheffield, there's I think 159 schools. Well, 136 of them have been affected by those funding cuts. And we know that, Sunak's recent budget only takes us back to 2010. It doesn't even begin to cover the gap that we've lost in education. And then council housing, we know that, I'm an ACOR member, so I know how important that, council housing is, and how people, we talked about landlords earlier, how people have been impacted over, the last 40 years, really, where we've been limited in being able to build council housing. And this wealth tax, you've been able to show all of those things that would make a material difference to people's lives, regionally, which I think is, just awesome, because it's ordinary people that benefit from all of those things, and they can all understand those things.
Yeah, it's ordinary people that are suffering from, or at the sharp end of all this. I mean, you mentioned the universal credit uplift then a moment ago. Obviously, 40% of universal credit claimants are in work. They're the only people that are going to benefit from Sunak's reduction of the taper rate by 8 pence, such as it is. And of course, the uplift was never applied to legacy benefit claimants or unpaid carers such as myself, which is why I raised the point, because it's something that's very, very personal to me. It's fundamentally, John's report is inherently about fairness. It's making sure that those who have been paying for so long are finally cut some slack, finally seeing some investment in their own lives to benefit themselves, and those with the most, who have got away with continuing to make exorbitant profits and increases in their own personal wealth, finally start to stump up a bit themselves. There's nothing wrong with that. And so much money could be raised for so much investment. Green energy was mentioned a moment ago. John mentioned climate. I'm down here in Cornwall, of course, extremely windy place, brilliant place for wind farms, massive coastline. Let's research and look into hydroelectric power. Heck, you've got geothermal power underneath Penzance. They warm their swimming pool with it. They're outdoor Lido, but they don't warm up anything else with it. There's so much opportunity for energy, as an example, down in my end of the country, that mine and Jen's end of the country, I should say, it's ripe for improving our economy locally and benefiting nationally. And all it takes is to redistribute some wealth and get those that can paying where they haven't been made to previously.
Now, there's a good point. I just want to ask John to come in on that, actually, because there is obviously a massive issue around people abusing the tax system as well. So it's not just about we're not trying to tax fairly, not enough tax is actually being paid by people that should do already. How can we get politicians to take tax abuse more seriously? Have you got any ideas around that?
Well, look, here's what I think people will think. But before I do, I see there's somebody else still talking about modern monetary theory. Look, I'm fully aware of it. There are people who are experts on it. Some people believe in it. Quite a lot of Marxists and socialists and others say it's not right. I think you need a separate program on it, but you will need 2 economics degrees apiece because it's complicated. But let me come to the point that was just raised with me. I don't want to leave anybody unhappy that I haven't addressed an issue. I've looked into monetary theory really quite carefully, and it's got a lot going for it, but there are some issues as well. Now, when it comes to the tax system as a whole, including the way it's a soft touch for people who've got clever accountants, here's what I would say to you is this, because it raises a different question in ordinary people's minds. If you say to all people in the street, in the club or whatever, most of them are much more radical economically than our politicians admit, and most of them are quite sussed out, by the way. What do you think about this system where, the richest 1,000 people gained more wealth in 10 years than the rest of the country lost in income because their income went down? The first thing they'll say is, all them lot down in London, they're all up to their neck in it. They've got their hands in our pockets and our wallets, and they're taking money from us. Now, if I were to put that into our language, but I would use that language as well, by the way, I don't have a problem with that. What I would say is the political system itself, including those people who make decisions about tax, but the whole political system is really infected by the power of money and wealth, to the extent that it's penetrated every aspect of our political life, our institutions, our government, and our state apparatus. Now, how does that happen? Well, it happens in a number of ways. There isn't time here to go through all of it, but I've called it corporate capture. And what do I mean? What I mean is the corporations have captured so much of British politics that, in fact, politics is subservient to big money, to big corporations. And it sounds like an extravagant statement. I believe we can prove it. There isn't time now to go through it, but I came to this conclusion, and I went to Washington, by the way, because I wanted to know how politics in Washington deals with the power of money. And what I have to say is, yes, Washington politics is under the thumb of big money, big corporations, buy and sell politicians, so they say. But in Washington, there are safeguards. There are safeguards in Washington. I went and had a look. I met all the people. I met senators who every afternoon. Do you know what the senators do every afternoon? They go to a telephone in the party headquarters and they're ringing up rich people. Can you give us money for my next campaign? I mean, we met people, Congress people and senators. That's what they were doing. It's quite extraordinary. But there's lots of different checks and balances. Now, when you come back here, you think, oh, well, we're British. However, the truth of the matter is, when you begin, and I've been, as we know, I was in the last Labour government in the cabinet, and then I was in the shadow cabinet throughout the Ed period and the Jeremy period. You can see how money infects politics. Rich people, wealthy people, people with privileged backgrounds, the elite, the British establishment, they're everywhere. They're everywhere. And therefore, I came to the conclusion that, ordinary folk are right when they say, well, the problem is it's never going to be okay because look, all them lot down there have all got their hands in other people's pockets. And I'm afraid that's how I see it. So in the manifesto, I wrote the manifesto about political and constitutional reform. What I suggested was we need a political democratic revolution, because power needs to be put back into the hands of the people, or it needs to be put into the hands of the people for the first time maybe in British history, so that the wealthy don't exercise such an influence that the decisions which are taken are in their interests rather than the interests of the wider public. Now, this is a really important debate. Now, so when I hear people saying we need constitutional reform, let's change the way we vote, I think to myself, well, I'm interested in the debate about how we vote, but that isn't going to stop the power of money. It isn't going to stop the British establishment running the whole blooming system from top to bottom. We've got to change the MPs, how they work, change how the cabinet works, and all the other state institutions. So that's off the subject of wealth in a way, but it's not, because the first thing people will say to you isn't, well, I think you should raise taxes to them on the rich. The first thing they'll say is you're all as bad as each other. And that has got to be addressed. If Labour wants to get the working people to vote for us again, we've got to show that we'll be different in the way we do politics. That's me ranting on a bit, by the way, but I feel strongly about this.
You're absolutely bang on, John. I think you couldn't be more right. We need that democratic revolution. To have proper democracy and power in the hands of ordinary people in this country would be revolutionary. It's that big a deal because it's that far away from where we are right now, I think. So rant away. Just Damo's a pretty good ranter too. So I'll come back to you in a second, Damo, but I think Bonnie wanted to come on a point too.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. As the Londoner on the panel, I just wanted to just get in there. Where I live actually was a firework factory until they built the houses here. So we used to have factories in London too, and we've also got the docks and everything that were deliberately run down under Thatcher, and now they're mostly owned offshore by a corporation who are charging enormous rents for very glossy high rises and things like that. But anyway, I digress. What I wanted to say was, in the last general election, knocking on doors of ordinary local people, they one concern they expressed about voting Labour was they didn't want to get taxed on their home, because obviously properties in London, as you referenced, John, are incredibly expensive. And the few, I still say ordinary people, because they're doing ordinary jobs with ordinary lives, who have managed somehow by hook or by crook get a mortgage on somewhere that they can just about manage to live in, were worried that they were going to get charged a tax. So I was so pleased when I read this report. As early as page 7, it makes it clear that this is not a wealth tax on your home. Most people who live here in this part of South London, if they have a home that is, if they have a debt on a property, basically, that is their home. They haven't got multiple properties. And it's because of landlords buying up multiple properties, particularly in London, because that's where they can attract the highest rents. It's pushing the price up, which means that my kids don't stand any chance whatsoever of being able to buy somewhere that they can live, and there's no chance of a council property for them to live in either. So we're seeing people being pushed out further from London because the property prices are as high as they are. So avoiding a wealth tax on your home is really, really important, and it's really important that we get that message out. And to a similar degree for Jen and Damo down in Cornwall, their property prices are being pushed up by landlords who have got holiday homes or places that they rent out through Airbnb and things like that. Those people need to be paying a tax on their ways of making money. It's not a tax on ordinary people's homes. I think that's so key to get out, make it loud and clear.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, absolutely. Nadia, you wanted to come in on tax loopholes?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow on from the theme that John was talking about, about why it's important to close tax loopholes, because I think in the report you will find that John does provide how much money would be in the economy if we did close those loopholes on tax avoidance and tax evasion, and it comes to something like £29 billion per year. And if you think about, that in 5 years is 145 billion. And when we're talking about tackling the climate emergency, we're talking about 150 billion pounds, which is similar to what the tax avoidance and loopholes would give us in a short period of time. So I think it's really important that people understand the amount of money that we're talking about here. That billions that, more than we could ever count. It would take you years to count every pound of that billion, and that is what is being avoided, or there are loopholes preventing people from having to pay, and that's staggering. That's a staggering amount of money. It's important that people understand those amounts, because then I think we should be angry about that, and we should be demanding change because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just that they've squirreled that money away and they could be affording to pay the tax, but obviously they are inherently part of the problem, the biggest part of the problem, the people that have siphoned that much off the rest of us and the planet to extract that wealth should be the people paying the price now. So let's expand on that. I want to hear your thoughts on all of that, because there is obviously a lot that would need to be spent on trying to tackle climate change properly with the speed that we actually need, but it obviously needs to be part of changing the system. And I know you have covered this as well, John. So who wants to come in on that?
Well, if I can make a quick comment, the William Shapp's review on the railways, the reformation of the railways, it plans a 30% cut in budget for the railways. Now, as I said earlier, the railways are a net money maker for the economy. So to take money out of that is just going to further drive down living standards for so many people, beyond just those people whose jobs might be at risk. So investing money on the railway, which is one of the most sustainable forms of transport, it's certainly the most environmentally friendly form of public transport, and I would argue for the transport of goods. So if we've got that money that we can spend in that, we're taking cars and lorries off the road, which is going to improve the carbon footprint for this country. It'll make a massive difference.
Yeah, by the way, I agree with everything that's been said, and I'm really, really amazed you've all read the report carefully and you're able to quote things back at me, and thank you very, very much, because I was hoping it would be read and the message would get out. But when you think about what happened since I were a lad, let's put it like that, most of the utilities were owned by the public, and any surpluses, not that they made surplus, they weren't there to make a profit, they were there to serve the public, would go back into the public. Now, what's happened is all of those utilities have all been privatized. If you take water as an example, it's current because of that sewage thing last week. If you think about it, it's almost unthinkable that the very substance which humanity, in fact, the planet needs in order to survive, water, now belongs in private ownership. 71% of it by companies which are not even residing based in the UK. So profits which are made and dividends which are distributed from charging people here go to shareholders elsewhere in the world. Now, we're not against foreigners, so we're not Little Englands, but it's interesting that should be the case. Now, apart from that, large amounts of profits are being made from gas, electricity, water, and so on and so forth. And yet they haven't invested in a new economy, not properly, not in a profound way. The best that they can do in the energy sector is say we'll build some more nuclear. And I think we've got to do better than that. When you think about water and the sewage and the leaks which happened, they're happy to pay fines. In my area, I think they paid £150,000 in fines for sewage into the water courses, And now they're saying, I think it was a minister, was it, the other day, who says, well, rivers aren't meant for swimming in, by the way. Or was it somebody from the industry? I can't quite remember. But it's true that somebody said that. What do you mean? Rivers aren't meant for swimming in? You know, are they open seas then? Is that where we are? But the fact is that so much of the wealth has been handed over to private individuals. You know, the rivers, the water supply, the sewage system, the energy production, and so on and so forth. So this aspect of wealth is not simply about trying to tax people, which we should do, who are gaining wealth, but it's also trying to regain control by various means of so much which has gone wrong with our society since the neoliberal age was brought in at the end of the 70s. And I think, I think this is a very, very important matter. Now, if we had the resources and the power to do it, which clearly we could if we chose to, we could then begin to transform our country in terms of water control, the air we breathe, and so on and so forth. And I think that is where we need to go. By the way, it will create jobs. And one of the things that I hear in my patch is, well, you've closed the bloody coal mines. Now you've done it because of some daft thing about green. Because what people are worried about is it means more job losses. But actually, if you think about British engineers and inventors and all those kind of people, and the workforce more generally, they are capable of finding new ways of producing energy, of cleaning the water, and so on and so forth. And I really I don't like the word crusade anymore, because we've got this problem with the crusaders and the Islamic community, but a national drive powered by income which we've got from taxing the wealth of the country in order to transform our country from top to bottom, creating real permanent jobs, using the energy, the stamina, the strength, the intelligence, the ingenuity of our people is the way forward. But instead, they're languishing. People are languishing. I know people in my patch, because I'm the centre where the coal mining industry, older people now, who did know how to capture carbon from the products of combustion. And they knew how to burn fuel in much better, cleaner ways, but they were never allowed to do it. Now they're on the dole. That engineering skill is capable of being rediscovered, and our scientists and our universities, we've got to set our minds to it as a country. We can't just drift endlessly into a long-term decline while the city gets richer on the back of everybody else. That is not the way to go. So I suppose my final thought in some ways is that I am very, very optimistic that if we get our argument out there and we say it with passion and common sense, we talk the vocabulary of the ordinary people, we can win the argument, because the only other thing is more of the bloody same. More of the same takes us nowhere except downhill. So, I saw somebody earlier on a comment on the bottom of the screen saying, it's all difficult, I've had enough, and all the rest of it. Don't give up. Do not give up. We can win this argument, but we've got to make it. So that's why I've done the report. And it's up to other people to take it forward, show it in different ways, and offer a new future to the country, all those areas that have been just held back. I'm very optimistic, but that's why I've written the report. And I'll be doing more. We're going to be producing more stuff in the future. And I'm so grateful to you for putting this show on, Jennifer, for conducting the discussion, and for the others for contributing. But I need to go. But of course, the show can go on without me.
Massive thanks from all of us, John. It's been wonderful. Thanks for doing the report. And I'm really, really encouraged to hear that this is the start of a new and ongoing dialogue where we can really start to explore those ideas. And you want to hear back from people as well. So anybody out there who's interested, get in touch with John, tweet him, get in touch with us, let us know.
Read the report and memorize it. Okay, it's nice to see you all. I'll see you all later.
Thanks, John.
Bye, John.
See you later, Nadia. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. I don't know. How do I get out of this damn thing, by the way?
Okay, everyone. So I think we'll just close now I'll go around and ask you for your final thoughts. So, Damo, I'll come to you next. We haven't heard from you for a while.
Water not for swimming, John said. Has anybody told the fish? Oh, what a stupid thing to say! My God, I mean, I'm reminded of the sewage issue and the water, and obviously we've got a big thing going on down here with South West Water at the minute, Jen, as you know, and all these water companies are monopolies. Essentially, you don't get to shop around. You can't switch to another water company. You've got whoever you're lumbered with. 23 Cornish beaches last week were not fit enough to be to go swimming at. That included Carbis Bay, where Boris Johnson held the G7. That included beaches in Newquay, including Fistral, where they have all the surf championships, and where they've been filming Game of Thrones recently. It's absolutely filthy, disgusting, and they shouldn't be allowed to carry on doing this. Yeah, I'm just absolutely raging about that. But one thing I did want to come back to and mention was a few more of the figures. I know Nadia mentioned the 145 billion by closing tax loopholes, but I just wanted to spell out a couple other things on here which stood out in this report for me. A graduated one-off wealth tax on incomes over £2 million. An income over £2 million, that works out at an hourly rate of roughly £1,100 an hour. Do you think people could possibly afford to pay a little more if they're earning that much? That would be nearly £200 billion on its own. You can have an annual wealth tax on those same people on that same income of over £2 million, and that could raise £22.5 billion a year if they effectively paid basic rate tax of 20% like ordinary taxpayers do. Why should they not pay that? If we've got to pay 20% tax in our jobs, why should people earning over £2 million not pay 20% either? And there was one in there that was my favourite. This one I did particularly like. If we tax dividend payments to shareholders, we'd raise £37 billion over 5 years. So over 5 years, we could pay off Dido Harding's test and trace wastage by the beneficiaries of privatization. I can't think of a better use for such money, quite frankly. And yeah, that's what I wanted to add.
Excellent contribution, as always. Thank you very much, Damien. Bonnie, over to you next, please.
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, I was just going to say, the arguments are so clear in John's report, and they are all given on a sort of worst case basis. If this is, on the minimum amounts of money that could be raised through these processes, not the maximum. So I can't think of a single argument to not campaign to get this report implemented by the government. And listen, whatever politicians decide to go with it, I think we need to get behind them. It's not going to be the Tories. I'd like to see all of our Labour MPs stand foursquare behind this, because I can't think of a single argument against it. The big thing for me, as I mentioned, the fact that you won't be charged a wealth tax on your home is really, really important, because a lot of people, I can hear the right-wing media pushing, the establishment media pushing that this is going to rob Granny of her house and make her homeless and all of that, and that is completely ruled out, which is brilliant. But a big thing is, with the tax changes that came through in the budget last week, we're seeing an intergenerational issue where young people are being priced out of the ability to live by the taxes they're being charged. For instance, if a young graduate is earning £27,000 a year, which is sort of just around the sort of what they call the average wage. It's not, they're not wealthy by any means, but because they've got to pay back the tuition fees, they're going to be paying an effective income tax of 42.25%. That is just a little bit below the tax chargeable to people on over £50,000 a year, who, they're not going to be skint, are they? Let's face it. So that's absolutely wrong. So a wealth tax like what's been discussed, in whichever form it's going to take, would take some of the pressure off the young people who need a break to start having somewhere to live and to start seeing the benefit of going out to work and all the studying they've done. And the tuition fee should be scrapped anyway. But the situation is, at the moment, young graduates are being charged more tax than people on 40 grand a year. And that cannot be right.
No, it's absolutely shocking. Thanks, Bonnie. It's really, really good to hear from you. Nadia, it's been great to have you join us tonight. It's been wonderful to hear.
I've loved it.
So far. So what are your final thoughts?
Well, I think everybody should read John's report, and I think we should be campaigning in the party on it. I think this should, for me, this builds on the last manifesto. It's exactly what we need. It's talking about, you know, the way that we can invest back into the communities. It's how we transform our economy. It's, you know, low on carbon and rich on jobs. I really liked the stuff that John talked about around the green economy. And I think this is something that we absolutely have to be campaigning on inside and outside of the party. I think for me, John should be in the shadow cabinet, because what's in this report, as he has said, can't be argued against. You know, those facts and figures can't be picked apart. It's fair on wealth, and it's obviously about redistribution. And that is going to be key if we are going to move forward as a country. So I think it's brilliant, and it's been great to be here with you all tonight. So thanks for the invite.
Excellent and brilliant contribution to finish us off. So I think you're absolutely spot on there as well, that we have to carry this conversation on in or outside the party. I read a book on inequality many years ago, just before I joined the Labour Party, and the Labour Party at that point was not campaigning for any of the sort of policies that I would like to see, frankly. We were still in power, but that didn't stop me joining and pushing for the kind of politics that I wanted to see. So I know a lot of people are really frustrated now, and we aren't seeing the kind of policies that we want. But there are so many self-evident truths in this report and on these wider issues around wealth taxation and reducing inequality. We cannot let the fact that it's not being pushed from the front bench right now stop us from continuing to have this conversation. So I'm so delighted that John has put this report out there and is also welcoming the ongoing conversation. So everybody watching this now, you need to get involved, start talking to more people, share this tonight, tell people about John's report, and start putting it out there in whatever way you can. There's so much fantastic information and detail we've heard from all of you tonight, and John especially. So thank you all very much. And I look forward to the next one, because we clearly need to have more of these conversations. There's so much more we can talk about on this subject to get the message out there. So I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Thanks. Good evening.
Bye.